Today, we're going to talk about some recent videos from Dustin, the sports card dad, and Jeff Wilson around, in-person autographs and the scarcity of them, the value of them, and why, in particular, I think people need to be very careful with what it is they're chasing because these things might not be as scarce as what you think they are, and why it also goes to some of the themes we've talked about in the past around people coming in and trying to change established beliefs and sentiments within the hobby. Now, you'll get what I mean on that a little bit later on, so just bear with me as we basically talk through each of the points for today. Now, for those of you that don't watch Dustin's channel, he's basically talked about in-person autographs for a number of months now, in particular after he acquired a pretty cool PC card, and that was a Drew Brees rookie card black refractor out of 100. It has an in-person signature on there, but it's also inscribed Cool Breeze. Now, as a PC collector or as any collector, having cards that have a deeper meaning or added value to them make it really exciting to own, right? You want to own those cards that have that additional story, right? Because it, elevates that connection between you and the card, which sounds a bit corny, but, all you collectors out there can relate. And he's basically talked about in-person autos and that Drew Brees card in particular as much as he's talked about Jeff Wilson recently. So if you do watch his content, you'll know that's actually a heck of a lot to talk about. But it's an interesting one. And he noticed some things out at the National this year, particularly around how a lot more dealers had in-person autographs for sale. And he asked the question here, is that basically happening because it's really popular to buy and sell in-person autographs? So basically they're dumping it out there to try and, offload them. Or are we seeing it because the volume is being driven by the fact that more and more people are getting in-person autographs signed? And he touches on in this video how, he's mainly looking at this from the perspective that if you're somebody that wants to maintain value long term, this is something that maybe should concern you or something that you should be, factoring in and keeping front of mind. And obviously I completely agree with that and think it's something that, not many people are factoring in when they're looking to buy this stuff or they think it's going to make them rich long term, because I definitely think it's a second point that Dustin touches on in his video where dealers are just looking to offload this stuff now because they have the opportunity to sell it for a lot more than they have in the past. I think if you've been a collector as long as I have and you've been participating in this hobby and going to games and getting things signed by athletes, you'll know that this has always been an incredibly popular thing to do. It's the reason why when you're looking at, vintage cards, you've got people that have whole sets of in-person autographs on those cards, or you're going to things like the Blowout forums, or you're checking out people like Wax Museum podcasts, you're seeing so many people have collections of this sort of stuff. There's so many forums and Facebook groups dedicated to people going ahead and getting these in-person autographs. So I don't think it's all of a sudden something new that we're seeing, right? It's always been there. People just haven't paid attention to it. People haven't given it, the respect that it probably deserves. Now, some people will see that and see it as an opportunity to come in and buy that sort of stuff because it is cooler than, pack pulled stuff, which it is for the most part. But one thing you need to keep front of mind when you're looking to jump into this sort of thing is, the sentiment that already exists within this hobby. Now, this goes to that thematic thing that I touched on at the very start of this video where you're not going to change established beliefs within this hobby overnight, let alone ever, right? Because people have shown over the last 25 plus years, maybe 20 to 30 years, that pack pulled autographs seem to be more desirable and more valuable for people within this hobby, right? And there is a number of reasons why. It goes to the same sort of thing when it comes to, game use patches versus buying just game use jerseys. People will pay a lot more money for a game use patch that's, tiny compared to buying a jersey like I've got behind me, just because they like that better. That's what's established. That's the belief system that's, within this hobby. And the same sort of thing is pretty clearly there when it comes to in-person autographs. Outside of a very select few, people don't really give a shit. And I think that's a really, sad thing to say. And when I say people, I mean, collectors, we obviously care about that sort of stuff. It's the same reason why Dustin really likes that Drew Brees. But the value is not really going to be there outside of those select few cases because people just have shown to have an affection for pack pulled stuff over those kinds of things. And it's a really interesting one when you've got people sort of jumping in and trying to change that belief system, trying to change that theme, but they're not actually paying attention to that established belief, right? It's just odd. And we saw it happen with things like Topps Chrome F1, right? When that first launched, and MetaZoo and some of these other sports where you had people coming in and trying to buy this sort of stuff thinking, well, basketball, first year Topps Chrome is really, really, valuable. I think F1 is going to be exactly the same sort of thing without realizing, well, do people actually give a shit about F1? Or beyond that, yes, more people are watching it now, but you're talking about that huge supporter base for F1 all over the world. But does the rest of the world actually collect cards like we do in the United States or the UK or here in Australia? No, they don't. So you need to think about those sort of things as well. It goes to things we've touched on in the past around, people wanting to buy, underappreciated positions, cards of players in underappreciated positions in different sports. We used the example last time of, batters and like hitters and pitchers in baseball. Hitters typically generate a lot more money, right, on average, and pitchers don't. Yet you've got people out there saying, well, I think pitchers are going to be more appreciated long term. I'm going to buy these cards on the cheap and price them the same as hitters in the hope that people are going to, truly value them the same. When in reality, like we touched on in that video, you can't look at it like that, because if you look at the sport of baseball since its inception, people have had an, affection for hitters a heck of a lot more than they have had for pitchers, right? It goes to things like in soccer where, the strikers and attacking midfielders are the ones that are going to generally hold value better than the defenders or the goalkeepers, outside of, again, a select few. And that's what the fans have established following that sport for 100 years. So you, as a card collector, are not going to change that overnight. If you're a fan of the sport, which is probably why you're buying, the card in the first place, you're going to be buying what you like, and you're not going to change that opinion, right? You have to change the opinion of everybody within the sport to all of a sudden appreciate those things that are underappreciated. And I think in-person autographs fall into that same bucket. They've got a really, probably small compared to the sports card hobby in general, click and passionate collector base that like what they like, and they like it because it is really cool to own that sort of stuff. But the wider sports card community doesn't really give a damn, and they probably won't ever. And it's a weird thing that just happens within our hobby, but it's just how it is. So again, outside of those select few, I don't think you're ever going to really see it blow up in value. And a lot of people are sort of seeing what Jeff Wilson is doing with regards to the things that he's buying, and just thinking they can do the same and go out there and buy any in-person autograph, which is not going to work. It's not how it works, right? Jeff is buying very specific things of very specific players who didn't sign all that much, but even if they did sign a heck of a lot, he's buying very specific, rookie cards and things like that that don't actually have that many autographs out there. And that's the stuff that's going to be valuable long term. Like Dustin talks to in this video, he talks to, I think it's the Ken Griffey rookie. I think it's the Flea rookie that it refers to, or I'm not sure if he had a Flea rookie. Maybe it's the Topps rookie. Again, apologies, baseball's not my thing, even though I'm wearing a baseball cap. He talks to basically seeing hundreds of those. So again, you need to be very selective with what it is you're chasing. And I think a lot of people in this space are not thinking that through. They're not doing that research before they jump into it, or, they're seeing what Jeff Wilson's buying, but they're not paying attention to what Jeff Wilson is doing. They're just seeing him buy in-person autographs. So you know what? In-person autographs are the thing to do. When in reality, what is Jeff actually doing? He's buying very specific things. Look at what Dustin's bought with that Drew Brees card. It is a very specific thing. You have to be very specific when you're chasing this sort of stuff. It goes to the exact same sort of stuff with modern cards. If you want to buy a modern card and think it's going to be scarce long term, especially with the number of parallels that we're seeing today, you're bloody naive if you think that stuff is actually rare. So you need to be very targeted to what it is you're actually getting. It has to be things like on-card autos. It has to be things like game-worn patches. Even one-of-ones aren't that rare these days. You need to be buying stuff that is truly, number one, scarce. Number two, probably has that deeper meaning that collectors will always want to try and chase it. And there's probably a third one that I can't think of right now, but that's the stuff you need to be doing. You can't just be buying anything and everything and thinking it's going to be valuable long-term, because that sentiment, that belief system is already established within the community. And yes, that stuff can change, but it more than likely won't. And you can't just be buying anything and thinking it's going to work. It needs to be that stuff with that additional, meaning and excitement around owning it, right? Because if you're, looking at things through the lens of making money, you're going to sometimes shoot yourself in the foot. But if you're, looking at things through the lens of being a collector, being a fan of cards, or being a fan of sport, you're going to be out there, wanting to buy stuff like this, right? Where it's a filthy looking game use patch, right? That is rarely ever seen. Right? You want to be out there trying to buy that sort of stuff. So if you have the excitement when you look at it, that might mean somebody else might be excited down the line. And then also, if you're going to be jumping in to buying things that you've never really bought before, do your bloody research before you do decide to do it, right? Because you're not going to change a belief system that is already established within the freaking hobby. And so many people seem to forget that. Dustin also touched on some other points within this video that I completely forgot right now. My mind's basically gone blank after that rant. I don't write any notes down for these video guys. I just basically wing it. So love me or hate me for it, but I do apologize. Let me know your thoughts down below. Check out the rest of Dustin's video because it is a really interesting one. And then let me know your thoughts on this down in the comments below, like I just touched on. I'm rambling as always. I'm a clown. Just forgive me, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.